So we have some interval I, and we had a function from interval to R, and if S naught belongs to I, we say f is continuous at S naught if for every epsilon positive, S delta positive, such that naught S minus S naught less than epsilon I implies naught S naught. This was the formal definition of continuity at the point. And if f is continuous, that's all is in I, we say f is continuous. We can immediately generalize this to the notion of continuity of functions between two metric spaces. So recall, we have x in set, and then d is the notion of a metric, distance between 2 points, dxy metric. What does it mean? With each pair of points, it associates a number which behaves like a distance, that is dxy greater than or equal to 0 for every xy in x, equal to 0 in front of the x equal to y. Distance is symmetric, and distance satisfies the triangle inequality. If you want to go from x to y, if you go via z, you may travel either the same distance or more distance. That's what the triangle inequality is. So, suppose we have metric spaces, but we'll generalize it now. So, suppose x1 d1 and x2 d2 are any two metric spaces. Now I'm going to replace this domain space by one metric space and the codomain space by another metric space. So I have a function from x1 d1 to x2 d2. So f is a mapping from one metric space to another metric space, and S naught belongs to x1. We copy exactly the definition. F is continuous at S naught if the same thing for every epsilon positive there exists a delta positive such that whenever the points are close here, the values are close there. So the point closeness is measured in terms of distance. Distance between S and S naught is less than delta, implies the distance between Fs and Fs naught is less than epsilon. So that is the definition of continuity in general. Okay. And this distance we can, let me make this for time. And also if f is continuous at every point, we say f is a continuous map. If f is continuous at every S naught belonging to x1, then we say f is a continuous map from x1 d1 to x2. There are one or two points that I will mention here. If you take any subset S of a metric space, XD, suppose you take a subspace of any subset of this, then that subset with the same metric is also a metric space. In other words, what you are doing is the same concept of distance, you are restricting to only the points in S. Okay? For example, you can take the plane and you have the distance between any two points. You can take only the lattice points whose coordinates are integers. All those points 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 1. So only the lattice points and take that set as S. Still the distance between those 2 points is well defined. So it becomes the same distance as the crow flies beyond. Then we have a metric space. So therefore, what is the most important concept in a metric space is the notion of an open set. So what is the connection between the open set in XD and an open set in SD? So between an open set in XD we simply have the following. The subset A in this metric space is an open set in that metric space. This whole thing is in the context of the metric space of SD, but this fellow can also be thought of as X. So as a set of X, how is he? Is he an open set in the XD? Not necessarily. Okay. So if and only if it must have been generated starting from an open set in X and removing all the points that are not in S, which simply means A is of the form O intersection S, where O is an open set in XD. Okay. What it means is, how do I generate open sets of this smaller metric space? You start with any open set in the big metric space, throw away all the points which are not in S. The remaining is an open set in SD. And do that for every open set in XD, you get all the open sets in SD. Okay, so that's the connection. So every open set in the smaller space is essentially the image of an open set. So in other words, those points in S are all filtered out. There is an eclipse of those points, and the remaining points that fall in S are the part of the moon that we see is an open set. Those points, the big space is the moon, and you eclipse those points which are not in S, and the remaining is an open. This is a new moon. This is a new open set. That's the new moon, not in that context of new moon that we understand. So you understand what? So it's just the non-points of S are all wiped out, eclipsed out. So take all the open sets here, remove, black out all the non-S points. The remaining things are all the open sets. Now this is, so for example, something very elementary that you should note. Then suppose we take the real line to be the usual real line, usual distance. Okay? Suppose I take my main space to be the real numbers with the usual method. Now if you take the set S to be this interval, right? If you look at this set, then S is not an open set in XD. I'll write now with that because that's next. So this is not an open set there because that point 1 is not an interior point, right? There is some neighborhood of that point which is outside. So it's not an open set. However, look at the metric space SD. But in a metric space, the whole space is always, the whole set is always an open set. So S is an open set in SD. So this interval 0, 1 is not an open set in the context of the bigger space, but in the context of the smaller space, it's an open set. So context is important. Therefore, you must tell exactly which is the space you are talking about. Without that, it doesn't make sense. You must be very clear about what is your domain, what is your codomain.
Sir, is that because the distance is not defined for points outside that set S?
Pardon me?
The D
Yeah.
metric is not defined for points outside S.
That world is doesn't exist for this problem.
So then,
So there is nothing out there. Maximum as far as S is concerned, that metric space below SD is concerned, there is nothing to the right. The neighborhood of 1 is simply 1 minus delta to 1. That's all. And that's there. Okay. What is there outside is not there. See what is meant by a sphere of in SD. In SD, what is, if we construct, for example, if a ball of radius half around the point 1, it is all those points S in that metric space whose distance from 1 is less than half. So only those points which is simply of 1. And that is to be treated as an open ball around the point 1. The open ball around the point 1 has nothing on that side, only this side. So that is the thing that you should keep in mind. Okay. So, as a set in this metric space, this is open, but as a set in that bigger metric space, it is not open. So you got to be very careful in what context, in which world you are talking about. If you change the world, your things are different. Right. Now it is in this context that suppose I have xd, x1, d1 and x2, d2, two metric spaces, and I have a function f which is continuous. Whenever I simply say continuous, it means at all points. Okay? Suppose I have this continuous map from x1, d1 to x2, d2, then that implies for every open set O in x2, d2, f inverse of O is an open set. The inverse image of an open set is an open set. If you keep track of the right, where is which metric space is the domain space, which metric space is the codomain space, then you are. Is it clear? So it must be a domain, and that's why right from the beginning I've been telling a function as a package deal. It has to have a domain, it has to have a codomain, and the rule of association. Together it gives rise to a function. Okay, before I start on the examples, one more statement I will make. I'll look at some very simple examples. Suppose I have a function. Let's go back to the real line. From the interval, now I can take any set S on the real line to R. Okay. Now what is meant by continuous function? The metric space I should choose on this side as SD and the metric space on that side as RD is said to be continuous if F inverse of A is open in S for every A open in. So that means F inverse of A is not an open set in R, but it is an open set in R with the non-S points removed, or an open set in R intersected with S. That is for every A open in R, F inverse A is equal to S intersects an open set. Okay. So it's always any open set in S starts off from an open set. It has a generic thing in it has this umbilical connection with the original space with which it started with, but some of its fellows have ancestors have gone. Okay. Only some fellows remain, and that open set is what it is. Okay. One more concept before I get to the example.
So what if S is taken as a complex space?
What do you mean? What if S is taken as a
Complex.
no problem? Take the topology, the distance concept here is the distance in the plane. The distance concept here is the distance in the real line. So Loy complex, why not take R2? Which is, for example, okay, I will give you, first of all let me write it. Suppose I take a function from R2 to R. What is, see, I already said you can take any metric space and any other metric space. Complex numbers is one metric space, and this side is the real number. You could have taken from Rn to Rm, R24 to R13. Same definitions will go to. You have to take the distance concept in the R14 this side and the R12 that side. So what does it mean? I have a function of actually two variables. Every point x1, x2 is associated with a real number. So what we are saying is, if you take two vectors in the plane, and if you look at the values here, which are real numbers. Why? Because the values are real numbers. So, suppose you take a point x0, we say it is continuous at x0, if this can be made within an fx0 plus epsilon to fx0 plus minus epsilon. For any given epsilon, this fy can be made to fall in this interval, provided you choose y within some distance. What does that mean? What is the distance now in the plane? You have to draw a circle with radius delta around the point x0, and if that point y not rise in that, then for such points if this happens, we say f is continuous.
But how do you interpret this? F inverse of A as an intersection of.
In this case, I have taken the whole plane. Suppose now I take only a disk in the plane. Okay? Then, similar situation. You can take a disk with only this boundary included, or only that boundary included, or this boundary. Then this situation comes in. Another important concept is the concept of uniform continuity. Yes.
Here is it necessary that f should be 1 to 1 or
Pardon me?
f?
No, absolutely. I am not talking about 1 to 1 at all. Constant function is also okay. The simplest continuous function is the constant function. What is continuous function? Changes must be somehow controlled. Changes in the function. Well, if it doesn't change at all, there is no question of problem about controlling it at all. So constant functions are the most continuous function, most easiest continuous functions, and with a vengeance, not one to one. They are many to one. In fact, everything to one. Okay, so there is no question of one to one in it. It's all general functions. What really it means is, well, let's look at it this way. Function is like a black box. You input an x, you get an. The input can be from any metric space, and the output is from some other metric space. That's what we are saying. This is the input space, is the x1 d1, and the output space is the. What we are saying is, take one particular point here and look at its output. Right? And what continuity means is, you can make the outputs to stay around this place only, very close to it, by making the input stay close to x0. That's what continuity is. Okay? That's what simply a continuity at the point x0 means. And if we can do it at every point x0, we say that system is continuous. That's all. This is a system. It's a non-linear system. And for some input, you get some other input. Therefore, need not be any linearity. And the system is continuous in the sense that these outputs here can be made to stay small, very close to the output of one particular point, if the inputs are made to stay close to that point x0 with which you start. That's all the continuity really means. Okay, now let us look at this picture itself, now that I have this picture. So suppose I have continuity at x0. What does that mean? I have x0 and I say close to this within epsilon error, then if I can do it if I stay close to that within the delta error. Now what is given to me? The point x0 is given. The tolerance error epsilon is given. It's like a game. Okay? At the point x0 I am playing the game. You are playing a card, epsilon. Now I have to play a card delta. My card should beat you in the sense that this must happen. I win if this happens. Now I will always win if it is a continuous system. Right. Now the card I play will depend on the error you say and also at the point where you are. If you change to some other point and keep the same error, but I may have to change the delta there. So in general, we will see example. Given epsilon, given the point or given epsilon positive, the delta will depend on x0 and epsilon. In which case, I have to be changing my control at each stage. The moment the error is given, depending on which point I am, I have to change the control. Can I not make the same control in the input space, whichever point I am looking at? If I can do it, it is called uniform control. That is, if we can choose, given epsilon positive, a delta depending only on epsilon, such that whenever this is the great spelling x1, x2 belong to x1d, fx1 and the distance between x1 and x2 is less than delta then the distance between fx1 and fx2 is the same. So it's totally irrelevant where you are in that space. As long as you are staying close in the input space, you will be staying close in the output space. That is what is known as uniform. Then we say the map F mapping omega 1 d1 to omega 2 d2 is uniformly continuous. Okay. There will also be uniformities that will come into continuity. We will be talking about uniform means dependence with one parameter is removed. There are many parameters, one by one you remove uniformly. It looks ugly, so we start using different words. We will come to that later. Right, so now let's look at some examples. The tables are not designed for this type of pens. And first of all, I am not designed for this type. Yeah.
Sir, can you explain how this last statement comes out to this one?
I will give you examples you will see. Huh? Where examples where we will not be able to choose a delta.
Not that one. This one where for all A open in R,
Yes.
F inverse A is S into intersection.
I thought we did it last time, but let me show it. The definition of continuity in terms of the open sets. That is, F is continuous if and only F inverse is an open set for. Is that what you want?
Sir, intersection with an open set in R, but S and R might not be of the same.
Okay. No, not in R. Where did I say?
So here, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
That's
Okay. Sorry. If you are, I thought, which context did I say it? I erased it somewhere. I thought this was what I said. Or in this context. If you are in the general context, I said if you take a subset of R and look at this map, then I say F is continuous if this. Yes, sir. Because what is the meaning of continuity in the metric spaces? Inverse of an open set must be an open set here. But any open set there must be of this form. That's what I do. Nothing more.
this is not general statement.
No. Because I am applying the general definition in general metric spaces to this special case. So all I have to do is get an open set in this metric space. But any open set in this metric space will have this structure. Always when you have a subworld, the subworld metric space, open sets will be intersection of an open set in the big world with this subworld. That's the standard this thing about open sets. Okay? Right, so let's look at some simple examples first on the real line, because afterwards we'll go to general metric spaces. Let us consider S to be the interval, open interval 0, 1, and consider the mapping F defined as F of x dx squared. Okay? Everybody knows it is continuous because I can draw the parabola. Now I want to see whether it's continuous because I can get the delta, whether I can play my card game properly. So the first thing that I will observe is for any S0 in S, F is continuous at S0. That is the first thing I will observe. Okay. Let us fix this. So what is it that I want to do? I want to look at the difference between Fs and Fs0 and see whether I can control it. So let's start estimating it. Okay. So for any S in S. What is, oh, let epsilon greater than 0. So that is the, you have played your card. You have told me that this is the tolerance error that I give you. Now you play your card delta. Okay. Now I am going to think, after all, even when you play bridge, the other fellow plays the cards, you make some calculations, hopefully you do some calculations, and then play your card next. That fellow they simply put something. At the first time likely they may win, but then they start losing. Anyway, so what we want to do is, let us look at how bad that difference can be and see whether we can control it. And we want to look at this. The difference must be met. So let us write what it is. That is equal to S squared minus S naught squared. Because Fs is S squared, Fs naught is S naught squared. Which is equal to S minus S naught into S plus S naught. I deliberately do first continuity only at S naught, though the answer is begging here for uniform continuity also, but I will not do it deliberately. So now what I will do is, what can I say about this part? Okay, let me do the uniform continuity itself straight away here. What can I do here? Mod S plus S naught is certainly less than or equal to mod S plus mod S naught. But both S and S naught are positive. In fact, I didn't have to worry about modulus there at all, because S and S naught are in the interval 0, 1. So this is less than 1 and that is less than, so mod S plus S naught is less than 2. So therefore, this is less than 2 times mod S plus S naught. Now let me tell you one thing, in all these estimates, eventually your aim is to get Fs minus Fs naught is less than constant times something that involves S minus S naught. Then we are okay. So therefore, if S minus S naught is less than delta, then mod Fs minus Fs naught will be less than 2 delta. But what now I know? You want this to be less than epsilon. I have a choice of delta. So I will choose delta less than epsilon by 2. So if you play your card epsilon equal 2 to the power of minus 5, I will play delta equal to epsilon 2 to the power of minus 7 and I am finished. Okay? So given epsilon positive, choose delta less than epsilon by 2, then mod S minus S naught less than delta implies mod Fs minus Fs naught is less than epsilon, therefore F is continuous. Okay. Simple. But how did our choice of delta? Did I ever bother which point I was looking at now? The moment you played epsilon, I calculated half of it and chose less than that. Whatever S naught you would have done, I would have done the same thing. So I have chosen my delta. My choice of delta had nothing to do with S naught. It purely depended only on epsilon. So this would happen as long as S minus S naught are within delta, wherever they are. This is going to be true. So here we find that the choice of delta depended only on epsilon, and whenever S1, S2 belong to S and mod S1 minus S2 is less than delta, we have mod Fs1 minus S2 less than epsilon. Therefore, F is uniform. This function is uniformly continuous. But if you go and tell outside, today in the class he showed that the function x squared is uniformly continuous, I will call you back and said you are not understood. Yes, I only said if this is the domain, then the function fx equal to x squared is uniformly continuous. Now, 0, 1 was it input. Suppose I had made it 0, 100. All I would have got here is
200.
whatever it is. 100 plus 100, 200. So I would have chosen epsilon by 200. Still I would have won the match. Still I would have got uniform continuity. If I had taken 0, 1 million also I would have done the same thing. Even if I had taken minus 1 million to plus 1 million, I would have put mod S1 plus mod S2, still 200 million would have worked. So whatever finite interval I had chosen, fx equal to x squared will be uniformly continuous. But if I choose an infinite interval, it's gone. Because essentially what happens is, these fellows could be moved towards infinity at that time. Even though mod S minus, there is a tug of war. S minus S naught is trying to make it small, but S plus S naught will be pulling you all the way to infinity, and there will be a problem. So, similarly, so I will write like that. Similarly, we can show that for any finite interval I in R, the map Fi to R defined as fx equal to x squared is uniformly continuous. However, next, just let us look at F mapping R to R, defined as fx equal to x squared. Now, therefore, I keep the domain, the codomain, all are important. It's not just x squared is continuous. It's not that x squared is uniformly continuous. X squared is only one part of the function definition. The domain, codomain, all are to come into the picture. Then only you start, you have been given a function. If somebody simply says, I have given you the function x squared, he has not given x squared. He has not given the function at all. He has to tell where. X squared where? Is it in the space of matrices? Then I am talking about the square of a matrix. So that's a different ball game altogether. So you have to tell what your domain is. Suppose now I consider in this space, you see that F is not, is still continuous. Why is it still continuous? It will be continuous at every point because this can be controlled very close to S naught only. Everything is close to S naught, so it cannot go beyond twice modulus S naught. We can make it maybe for 10 times modulus S naught, nothing more than that. So that part can be controlled if you are looking at individual points. But if you are looking at the whole thing as a uniform thing in the whole space, then you are not able to. Here what will happen is, your choice of epsilon delta will depend on the point S naught at which you are talking. Now we will show that it's not uniformly continuous. In order to show, this is another thing, in order to show that something is not uniformly continuous, what should you do? So contrapositive. So let us look at the definition of uniform continuity. So suppose I had f r to r uniformly continuous if for every epsilon positive there exists a delta positive such that some property P holds. We will worry about that property, that affects, etc., etc., etc. What is the negation of it? Therefore, not uniformly continuous means there exists an epsilon positive for every delta greater than 0. P does not hold. Okay? That's the contrasted. So now what is P? P is mod x1 minus x2 less than delta implies mod fx1 minus fx2 less than epsilon. So what is contra P? That mod x1 minus x2 less than delta does not imply mod fx1 x2 less than epsilon. What does that mean? There exists x1 and x2 such that the distance is less than delta, but mod fx1 minus fx2 violates this greater than or equal to epsilon. This is what you have to show, that if something is not uniformly continuous, there is some error in which I lose the game. If you are playing the uniform continuity game, you have a card for which I don't have a reply. I lose. Okay? That's what not uniformly continuous means. Okay. So now we will show, therefore, we will produce one epsilon. For this example, we will produce one epsilon and take any delta and produce 2 points within delta, that the difference is greater than. So, take epsilon equal to 1. So we are done. There exists, and we are going to show that for this epsilon it works. Take any delta. So we have to now produce these 2 points. Okay? Now look at n and n plus delta by 2, where n is a positive integer. Where n is a, so this is my x1, this is my x2. N is a positive integer. Now, I have done this. Is mod x1 minus x2 less than delta? Mod x1 minus x2 is equal to, in fact, delta by 2, which is certainly less than delta. So that's also okay. So the only thing is I want to make sure that I have done this. That's greater than or equal to 1. fx1 minus fx2 is greater than or equal to this epsilon. So let's look at that. What is fx1 minus fx2? In absolute value, which is n plus delta squared minus n squared. N plus delta by 2, the difference. The larger one is n plus delta by 2 square, where everything is positive there, n is positive there, delta is positive. What is the difference? That is equal to n squared is gone, n delta plus delta square. Right? The n squared is gone. And so now this is certainly greater than n delta. Because delta squared is positive. What do I want? I want it to be greater than epsilon. So I will cook up the n. This will be greater than epsilon if n is greater than epsilon by delta. What is epsilon? 1 in this case. So I am done. Take any delta, calculate 1 by delta. Choose an integer bigger than that. It is possible. Why? Because you are allowed to go all the way up to infinity. For any positive integer, there is always an integer, any positive real number, there is always an integer which is bigger than that. If delta is 10 to the power of minus 6, I can choose n to be 10 to the power of 7. It's gone, n is greater than. So whatever it is, I can always pick an n. So for any delta, pick n greater than 1 over delta, choose x1 to be this, x2 to be this, then we got the result. Okay? Therefore, we have, I'll write it again, for epsilon equal to 1, for every delta positive, there exists. So let us write like this. So let n be equal to the integer part of 1 by delta plus 2. Right? That's certainly greater than 1 by delta. Take the integral part of 1 by delta and add 2 more. You have got unlimited supply of integers, so add them. Then there exists x1 equal to 1 by delta plus n, 2, x2 equal to 1 by delta plus 2 plus delta by 2, such that in S, such that mod x1 minus x2 is delta by 2 is less than delta, and mod fx1 minus fx2 is greater than epsilon. Therefore, f is not real. Okay, so that's this negation, please. We'll keep on using again and again. For every L become there exists will become for every P. The property will become not P. P will become not P. Right. So therefore, the same formula defining the function x squared. So formula does not define a function. Get rid of your mind that the function is defined by means of a formula. No. That is only telling you what is the rule. It doesn't say where is this rule to be applied. Fx equal to x squared. Do I apply it on the domain of matrices? Do I apply it on the domain of numbers, real numbers? Do I apply it on the domain of complex numbers? Wherever it is, you have to be very, very careful to tell me where I apply this definition. Maybe even, so therefore you have to very specifically say exactly in what context you are talking about what. Because sometimes this becomes very, very hard on someone. There is a, I don't know whether I told you this, there was a joke some time back which I read, that a gentleman was talking to a professor and he told this professor a wonderful joke, really hilarious joke, and the professor did not laugh. After 15 minutes he started laughing. And the reason was the professor was a professor of jokeology or something like that. And according to the theory of jokes, something gets qualified to be called a joke if it satisfies some 25 criteria. So it took him about 10 minutes to see whether all the 25 criteria were satisfied. Then he was convinced it is a joke and therefore he laughed. He must be very close to being a mathematician. So like this, so you got, this function is continuous, don't jump to conclusion. See what is the domain, see what is the quadrant, see the epsilon, see the delta. And by the time this fellow would have drawn an x squared and it's continuous. There is another similar one about, you have heard of the famous mathematician by name Halmos, a very wonderful mathematician. He has his excellent contributions in linear algebra, measure theory, integration, operator theory, one-on-one algebras, integral equation, number of topics in analysis in algebra. I don't know whether it's the mathematics department or the central library has his autobiography. It's called I Want to Be a Mathematician. The title is I Want to Be a Mathematician. And in that, it describes one of the events that took place in his life. He was working as a postdoctoral fellow with von Neumann at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Princeton. And there was a professor by name Veblen. I don't know whether you heard of him. the mathematical physicist. Apparently he bought a new house and all these postdoctoral fellows as usual helped him move his things. And then he moved to the house, he had a circular dining table. And they tried to move it into the new house dining hall. The door was not allowing it to go in. Then Viplan said, just wait a minute. And then he and almost sat down and wrote down the equations. The door, this thing and all that. And finally proved a theorem that in this door, the maximum radius possible to move in is this. And my table is bigger than that radius, therefore I cannot move it. So he said, he called his wife's name and said, I approved, you cannot move it. She said, don't worry Annie, I already moved it. Okay, so that means there are certain hypotheses they made which were not valid in the reality. So sometimes it's not worth worrying so much, but you got to be very cautious. Very precise statement, but continue to need all these things. The first look, okay, it looks like continuous. But then that is only intuition. The rest of it you got to justify. Okay, so therefore, the moment you change the domain, the whole context will change. That's what the point is. Okay, next example. Let's look at S to be the open interval. I will just write. Okay. First of all, for any S naught in S, F is continuous at S. That's our plane. So what do we do? Let epsilon greater than 0 be given. We want to control the values of F within that epsilon around Fs naught. So we have to estimate Fs minus Fs naught and see whether that can be controlled. What is Fs minus Fs naught? 1 by S minus 1 by S naught, which is S naught minus S by S naught. I will not put an absolute value here because everything is positive. All the points are from S, they are all in 0. Now look here, this fellow is controllable because this control is where my card is. S naught minus S I can make as small as possible. It is the denominator that is bothering me. Okay. So now I will look at it closely. First of all, where is it that yes, I am going to choose somewhere here, 0, 1, S naught is here. I have to choose the S somewhere in this S naught minus delta to S naught plus delta. So, first of all, I will choose delta to be less than S naught by 2. You will see why. Give me the, so now you see my choice, I am already depending so much on, heavily on S naught, that point at which I am looking at. So, why I do that? Because then S naught minus delta will be greater than what? S naught, delta is less than S naught by 2, so minus delta will be greater than minus S naught by 2. So S naught minus delta will be greater than S naught by 2. And therefore, S will be greater than S naught by 2. Therefore, S greater than S naught minus delta implies S greater than S naught by 2. So this S is greater than S naught by 2. Therefore, 1 by S is less than 2 by S. So I'm sorry, where is the 2? Yeah, 2 by S. So therefore, this is less than 2 by S naught squared into mod S naught if S naught delta is less than S naught by 2 and S belongs to S naught minus delta S naught plus delta. Now we are done. Now I am going to choose S minus S naught again less than delta. So it is 2 delta by S naught squared. I want this to be what? Less than epsilon if delta is less than S naught squared by 2 into epsilon. So what should I do? Give the epsilon, then I will go and look at this number and look at this number. Whichever is smaller, I will choose delta smaller than that. I want two criteria for delta. Delta I have chosen S naught by 2. I also smaller than S naught squared epsilon by 2. In fact, if epsilon is less than 1, this will be smaller because S naught squared will be by 2 will be less than S naught by 2. So epsilon is less. So, but anyway, in general. So what is the conclusion? Given epsilon positive, choose delta less than S naught by 2 as well as S naught squared by 2 epsilon. Is it 2 by epsilon? Then S belongs to S naught minus delta, S naught plus delta implies mod Fs minus Fs naught is less than epsilon. Right? That's the continuity at S naught. But you may argue from here that the choice of delta depended on the point and therefore it is not uniform continuity. But that argument is not valid in a sense that you might have been stupid to choose delta like this. There might have been a cleverer way of choosing the delta without depending on S naught. I have been able to do this. This does not mean that nobody else will be able to choose a delta without a S naught. But to show that it is not uniformly continuous, you must show that nobody will be able to do it. So you will have to go back to that definition. There is an epsilon for which you give me any delta, I will choose 2 points within that distance, but the difference must be more than epsilon. Okay? But therefore, now exercise. Show this is not uniformly continuous. This is not uniformly continuous. What will happen is, roughly this, just roughly to tell what happened, I can pull these points towards 0. As you go closer to 0, the product SS naught is going to become very large. And therefore, no matter how much you control the numerator, they may be kept close to each other and pulled towards the origin. So keep S and S naught very close to each other, but then start moving them to the origin. The distance is maintained, but the denominator 1 by that is blowing up like mad, and that delta, poor delta in the numerator is not able to manage that at all. So the denominator wins the tug of war. That's the idea, but now put it in the same n. Now the n will go in the denominator to small points, but then the denominator going in the denominator will come to the top, so it will become very large. Right, okay, I will leave it at that. I will leave it as an exercise. Okay, I'll make some comments. Some of these things I may not be generally put because proving everything may become very difficult. Now suppose I take a closed finite interval AB. Closed bounded interval AB. And F then necessarily f must be uniformly. When you are having close bounded intervals, that compactness, said the close bounded interval on the real line has this very special property called compactness. That compactness forces issues on many occasions. That is why people work with compact, because there are lots of things that are available for them for free. If you have a continuous function on a compact set, it must necessarily be uniformly continuous. F must necessarily be uniformly continuous. Look at the difference between this and that example. In this example, I had a finite interval, but I did not have closed. And therefore, even when I had continuity, I did not have uniform continuity. But if you had continuity on a close bounded interval, you must necessarily have uniform continuity. And the generalization of this is this: if f maps we will have to use the word compact metric space. We will come to that later. We are not introduced what's the compact metric space, but whatever it is. This is the close boundedness role is the compactness. So if you have a function defined on 0, 1, so what are the things that we know? So suppose I know f a b r is continuous, then what are all the things that I know? Of course, the definition of continuity at each point. Firstly, I can write down for every S naught, for every epsilon positive, there exists a delta, etc. That's the definition holds. The next important part is, now I know f must be uniformly continuous. A lot of difference between having a close bounded interval or just having a bounded interval. Next, we saw last time that if f assumes any two values, then it assumes all values in between. That is, image of f is an interval. This is what we observed last time. And then f assumes f has a max and a min. That is, image of f is again closed bounded interval. So, a lot of things, it's only therefore a continuous function on a close bounded interval is simply distorts that into another close bounded interval. What it means is, and not only that, this uniform continuity is also guaranteed for such functions. Now look at the corresponding thing here. Well, this thing is true even for that example. Continuity is okay. No, uniform continuity is false. Continuity was okay, and the intermediate value is independent of the closeness, but then that it has a maximum and minimum is false here, because in this case there is no max. As x comes towards 0, the fx goes on increasing. There is a min, namely 1, but there is no max. So therefore none of these properties may be valid. It may not be valid if you are not in this, but if you are in a close bounded interval, all these nice properties come into the picture. Okay. Now, we have been talking about continuous only. So what happens if it is discontinuous? What are these discontinuities? Now I am going to give one example. You have not given me any example of a discontinuous function. Well, if you want me to give a discontinuous function, very easy, draw. Right, make it as 1 up to 0, and after 0 make it as 0. This is one quick, but let us now, I am going to give you a very complicated function, okay, because these sort of functions you all know. So I am going to give a little more subtle function. With proof I will skip, but I will just indicate how it works. Okay. Suppose now I may take the x0, 1. So suppose I take a function f, which is defined as follows.
I'll give you 2 examples.
Now I have to say what is f of x. For any x in 0, 1, I must tell what is the value f of x. Now I am going to do it in 2 different ways. Well, let me give the first example. It is 0 if x is rational, 1 if x is irrational. You take that point x, if it's an x is a rational number, it goes. In other words, if it's a rational number, it switches off, and if it's an irrational number, it switches on. That's all that function does. Okay? That's the system switches on if it's an irrational number, switches off if the input is a rational number. Now look at this thing. Is it continuous? This is very badly discontinuous, because if you take any rational number, however close you go to it, there is an irrational number sitting here. So at this point it is 0, and at any close point it will be 1. So it will be bouncing back and forth from 0 to 1 very badly. Similarly, if you take an irrational number, no matter how close you stay, there is a rational number sitting there. So it will be 1 here and 0 there. So clear, this is what is meant by clearly. F is not continuous at any point. Okay. Now I'll give another example. Same thing. Fx equal to 0 if x is irrational. But now if x is rational, I am going to do something. Let me make it 0, 1, okay, because it doesn't matter. But it is necessary, that subtlety I will avoid. If x is rational, I am going to do in a very peculiar manner. Now what is meant by a rational number? It must be of the form p by q. Now we can write it as 2 by 4 or 1 by 2 or 3 by 6 or 4 by 8. So we will follow some convention that all the common factors are eliminated and we reduce it to the lowest form. Okay. In fact, I forgot that word, that lowest form. I then looked up at some high school book what is meant by cancelling out and things like that. If x is rational, equal to p by q in its lowest form. Then I define it to be simply the denominator, 1 by q. I just wipe out the numerator and make it as 1 over q. So for example, if I will take the point 3 by 4, the value of the function will be 1 by 4. If you take the point 1 by 4, the value will still be 1 by 4. So the value of the function is only the denominator in its lowest form, whenever it is rational. Okay. What happens to this function? Certainly this function is not continuous at irrational numbers. Because at irrational numbers it is 0, but there are rational numbers there where the value is 1 by q. We will still say that 1 by q may be small. But let us look at, first of all, at least the rational numbers. What happens at the rational numbers? Well, the neighborhood non-rational numbers don't create any problem. They are 0. Right? Now I want to say, what happens to it? Let me look at it this way. Suppose x is irrational. Let me first take that. Suppose x is irrational, x naught. I take a point x naught which is irrational. I take a neighborhood of it. This is 0 and this is 1. This is x naught minus delta x naught plus delta. What is the value here? Fx naught is 0. Now no problem with all his irrational neighbors. They are all 0. The only fellow who will create problem is the rational fellow who is close to him. Now the rational fellow close to him is the denominator. That is what is irrelevant. What happens to these denominators?
It is closer.
Yeah.
Probably it could be made as small as possible. I mean,
The denominator or the value?
value as small as possible.
How do you say that? It's true, but how do we say this? Take this neighborhood. How many rational numbers will be there with denominator, say 2?
Depends on the position.
In the interval 0, 1. After all, you are in the 0.
At least at the most one.
At the most 1. With the denominator 2. How many rational numbers will be there with denominator 2? At most. Denominator 3. 2. Denominator 100. Right. So for any given denominator, there can be a finite number of rational numbers with that denominator. Right? Therefore, if you look at in this neighborhood, there are infinite number of rational numbers. So therefore, with each denominator, there can be only finite number of them. So the denominators must be going to infinity. Q must be going to infinity. If there is a rational number which is very close, coming close to this fellow x naught, the denominator sequence must be going to infinity. If the denominator is going to infinity, what is going to happen to 1 by q? That will go to 0. So whenever you take a rational sequence going to x naught, the rational sequence will be such that the denominator sequence will be going to infinity, and therefore 1 by q will be going to 0. So even if you approach the point x naught by rational number, you will get the same limit 0. So what is it I am telling? Remember when I said continuity last time, I said continuity can be interpreted. Whatever sequence I choose to go to x naught, the same limit fx naught must be obtained. If you choose a sequence consisting only of irrational numbers, no problem, all are 0. If you choose a sequence of rational numbers, then q will go to infinity, therefore 1 by q must go to 0. Again I get the same result. But if I get a mixture, what will happen? Well, I can throw away the irrational numbers because they are anyway 0. What is left out is rational numbers. Again the denominator will have to go to infinity. It will go to 0. So therefore, this function is continuous at irrational numbers. Okay? Whether we approach x naught, I will just write like this, through rationals or irrationals, the limit is always 0. That is the conclusion. Because for any q, there are only a finite number of rational numbers in 0, 1 with that denominator. So there is no question of that fellow dominating. So therefore continuous at all. At all the irrational points it is continuous. What happens to the rational points? Take the point half, right? If you take the point half, what is the value at that point? Half. But in any neighborhood there is a fellow who is 0. So the difference is at least half. So if you choose an epsilon less than half, I cannot control the difference to be less than half, no matter how close I go to that point. Same thing with any other point. So therefore it is discontinuous at all the rational numbers. Okay. So I'll put these things, explain this thing. Discontinuous at all rationals. So what is very peculiar? These fellows, these rationals and irrationals are so densely packed, but at some point it decides to be continuous. Again, immediately very close to it there is a rational number, it fails to be continuous. So you cannot draw this function. How do you draw this function? You don't even know where to go. 0, suddenly immediately you must come to 1, immediately go to 0, immediately to 1, immediately to 0. You cannot draw this function. There is no graph. I mean, graph in that sense that we draw. Mathematical graph is there. Right. Okay. Now, I have given these two examples. One where everywhere it was discontinuous, and the other case where it was discontinuous at rationals but continuous at irrationals. Can you give another example where it is discontinuous at irrationals but continuous at rationals? The answer is no. You cannot construct such a function. The reason is there is some order in madness also. The points at which a function can be discontinuous cannot be an arbitrary set. The discontinuity set of points, for any function f, if you take the set of all points at which f is discontinuous, it has to have a structure, and that structure irrational numbers don't have. And therefore you cannot have a function with only the irrational numbers as the discontinuous. So that's precisely what I want to discuss next in the next class. So I'll put that question, can we get a function from 0, 1 to r such that, or you can make it r to r, it doesn't matter, such that it is discontinuous only at irrationals but continuous at rationals. The answer is for this what we will show is what I want to show is the following. I will not read it down. Take any function, take any f mapping 0, 1 to r. I'll just concentrate on 0, 1, but it doesn't matter anywhere. Then define df to be the set of all points where f is discontinuous at x. Take all the points where f is discontinuous at x. In the example 1, df is entire line. In this example, df is r. In this example, df is q, the rational numbers. In general, df must have some structure. And irrationals say don't have this structure. Therefore, df cannot be equal to irrationals or any such other. So therefore, it is not that you have too much freedom with discontinuity also. There is a certain restriction with discontinuity. You can't just fool around with discontinuities also. In as much as there are there is not too much freedom in continuity, there is not too much freedom in discontinuity also. You cannot just make any arbitrary place discontinuous, etc., etc. You have to have certain structure for the set of points where you want to make the function discontinuous. You cannot just arbitrarily do discontinuity. And that's a very strange result. And you may recall that sometime when I was doing the metric spaces and etc., the topological ideas, I introduced a very important theorem called Bayer's category theorem and said I will keep on coming back to it again and again. Okay? So I will first come to this and say how again the Bayer's category theorem will come into the picture to show that this is not possible. Okay? The structure of the required structure for discontinuity set is not possessed by the irrational, comes from an application of the Bayer's category theorem. It is one of the most beautiful and powerful theorems in analysis. Bayer's category. It will keep on coming. We already saw a couple of things in the previous set, namely that a characterization of polynomials to the derivatives. We saw a characterization of polynomials to the integrals. Now we'll see an application here. We'll go on seeing applications. This has something to do with the category of a set. Okay, we'll look at the set of discontinuities next time. Basically, the theorem says that the set of discontinuities must be what is known as an F sigma set. So I'll recollect slowly what is an F sigma set and then show why the discontinuity. There are two things. If some set is the set of discontinuities for a particular function, then that set must be an F sigma set. Conversely, if you give me an F sigma set, I will construct a function which is precisely discontinuous at these points. So F sigma sets are the only sets for types of sets at which a function can be discontinuous, and the irrationals are not F sigma, and therefore there cannot be a function which is discontinuous peculiarity. So it is not only the continuity, points of continuity which have some structure, the points of discontinuity also have some structure. So that will be my, I will start off in the next class from there. That will be my main topic of discussion next time. I may not be doing everything concerned about it, but most of it I will do. This function defined as fx equal to 1 by x, sine 1 by x. What can you say about its continuity, uniform continuity, or anything like that?
It is continuous but not uniformly continuous.
Yes, that's what I want proof. Because one proof is the continuous function of a continuous function is continuous, and I'll ask for a proof for that. 1 by x is continuous, sin x is continuous, so continuous function of a continuous function is continuous, therefore it is continuous. But it does not mean discontinuous, non-uniform continuous, continuous function of a non-uniform continuous function, is it non-uniform continuous? You understand? You take for example, if you take fx to be sin hx to be sin x, and gx to be 1 by x, and this is just h of g of x. So this is continuous in 0, 1 you are saying. So it's a continuous function of a continuous function. But why should continuous function of a continuous function be continuous? That's the first question. That has to be proved. The next, you may say continuous function of a non-uniformly continuous function is non-uniformly continuous. That's a big claim. That you have to show why it is true. Okay, so that's not necessarily true. Therefore, non-uniform continuity also has to be used, proved cleverly. But clever is not that difficult. If you understood the 1 by x example, it's essentially the same example, but you have to carefully handle it. That's all I can say. What roughly it says is, when we went towards the origin, in the 1 by x case, I kept n and n plus delta. 1 by n and 1 by n plus delta. But then I moved them close together, but the values were differing highly. But here what will happen is you will have to look at the sign. What happens to 1 by x? It goes to infinity as x goes to 0. So therefore it will very often hit multiples of pi by 2 as many times as it wants. Okay? And therefore sign can go on between +1 and -1. If you cleverly choose that it hits two close points, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 only, the difference can be 1 and -1, 1 and -1. Keep 2 points at which it is 1 and at which it is -1. Keep on moving it. Then you find the difference always stays at 2. And so you are not able to control. This is the rough idea, okay? But then you have to put it all in epsilons and that. That is the technical part of it. The intuitive part of it, you see that as you go towards 0, 1 by x goes to infinity, therefore 1 by x will hit multiples of pi by 2 as many times as you want, and therefore it will multiples of 3 pi by 2 also any number of times, and therefore you are able to control. So that's the hint, okay? And try to put that here. Okay. But for all f,